Just read the highlighted stuff. That should be enough.
The nature of a thing is its power of acting in a specific determinate way. That's too abstract for me. What is that about? I'll read this. I'll read the whole quote later, but
okay. Determinate as in nature is knowable. Everything can be understood. Everything operates by a specific nature, a specific way, not random. Unlike Hume. Hume would say it's like things are more incidental. Aristotle is saying things are the way they are by their nature. They can't be any other way than their nature. That's a very determinate and clear to understand thing.
Which is use determinate as a word in explaining.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Principle to standards.
Yes.
All right, some random stuff about history before we go on to. I'll try zoom in on the relevant parts. So apparently, yeah.
I want to show one more.
Yes.
About ethics. I thought there was. Let's see.
Actually, let me bookmark these so I can read the rest.
Yeah.
Or just copy. I can copy it from the chat anyway.
Let me see which one. Here we go. 2 pictures, 2 quotes. Or actually, go to the bottom picture of this link. And it's basically what Rand thinks about ethics too. The other parts might not be. The bottom picture of this link.
Yeah.
They all have multiple. The ethics. Aristotle's basis for ethics. Second picture.
Yeah, I'm on the second picture, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Just look at those quotes.
Oh, no.
The highlights.
Okay.
No, the highlights.
Is that referring to induction versus deduction?
No, it's about maybe a little bit, but it's just about what ethics is supposed to judge, what it's supposed to think like. That it's not a mathematical equation you're doing. The Platonists did it like math. Like they basically believed you could find an equation that would determine what's right. But Aristotle said like you can't do it that way. It's more hands-on.
So to reason well and beautifully, is that what he's talking about?
Yes, to live according to your nature, to be actively performing those things.
And then here are the conditions. So length of life, riches, and a proper society to function in.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the connection to politics.
Yes.
And that's basically after Nicomachean Ethics, that's basically what he says. And then he starts the next book.
I started reading We the Living.
Yeah, good one.
Isn't that's supposed to be an example of concretizing how important political conditions are for flourishing, right?
Yeah. But I think it's very biographical, or rather autobiographical.
Right.
Okay. And I'll show you, you don't need to go over them now, but I'll link you the other quotes.
Yep.
One is about his method of inquiry, which you might find useful just in general. Like his method, the way he writes his books. Methods of inquiry. It's a long one, but I highlighted it to make it clear.
So should I read this later?
Just look at the highlights. There's only like one highlight per page. It's not that much. It's just the basic outline. Number 1 is what? Whatever. Number 2, number 3.
What? Okay, so what's this? The first step in any of Aristotle's inquiries to determine the object of investigation. What does that mean other than defining what it is you're trying to find out?
I think it's actually similar. The same thing, basically.
Okay.
I mean, that is like defining your terms in a way.
Okay, the second step. So this is his general approach to inquiring on anything.
Yes.
Okay, and then so second step is to see basically pre-existing knowledge, identifying the pre-existing knowledge.
Yeah,
Okay.
what do other people say? And then
The third step.
The way we talk about it, basically. Examining how we talk about it and the suggested ideas.
Dialectical examination.
Yeah, just talking about it.
Right. Questioning.
Then it's the facts.
Okay, so he actually begins with pre-existing knowledge, questioning it, trying to understand it, and then he goes to the facts at the end.
Yeah, it's not strictly this, but it's his general way of analyzing things when we think about them.
Yep.
But ultimately it is about the observations, because that's how you validate, that's how you know it's true. It's not just, he doesn't stop just at the dialectic, but then say, let's confirm it. It's basically what he's doing.
And then it seems like the final step is teaching.
More or less.
Okay.
Just different ways. And I give you the one of essence. I don't know if I gave you that one. It tells you also kind of what it's about an acorn. It actually helps you understand.
I didn't read it. I copied all the links that you gave me though.
Yeah, you can get that one later. And the cause is just take a quick look. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not that much. It's just like 3 lines.
Where is it?
I just sent it.
Am I looking?
Yeah, the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the 5th line.
Oh, the 4 causes.
What is it? Questions.
Out of what it is it made? By what agent? For what end?
Yes, that's everything.
This is why he looked at is this why he came up with the view of the prime mover? Because he's like, okay, if you have one big generalization of existence, then you can ask, what is it made? Like, what agent made it and for what end?
Well, not that question, but yes, that by generalizing, we can get at those sort of questions like, what does it mean to exist even? What does it mean to change? The prime mover isn't strictly a thing like God, but that's complicated. So that really gets into how we thought about it and all that. But this is basically just how he explains anything. If you want to understand the causes, it's not just how does it move from point A to point B, but what's the nature of the cause? For what reason does it change? It's not just that. It's not just the moving parts. It's not just materialism. It's the nature of how they work together, and for what all life needs to flourish and exist, and that's the cause for their being. But it's not cause in the sense that some cells went together and they made this happen. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. I'd need more examples. So what about take a human, for example? Okay, what is it? Human. Out of what is it made?
You could say what is it made would be, that's what it'd be.
By what agent? Another person. For what end? I don't know. Like, what is that?
Agent being like man begat man is the example that Aristotle likes, that you're made from another person.
Yeah.
In a literal way. And by what agent? The efficient cause. Well, that's a lot like that's man begot man. Material cause is just like an embryo grew. The formal cause is like, well, the nature of being a rational animal is why you operate in this way. Final cause is like life is the ultimate end. Like, for what end are we moving towards?
To live. Okay.
Yes.
And what about applying this to something like what caused World War I? Like, what is it? Okay, war. Out of what is it made? How do you even apply that to?
Well, we not directly me, but we could think one is started from Archduke Ferdinand being killed. You could
Okay.
say that's a efficient cause. That's the most proximate one, most immediate thing. But in general, it's more like the nature of the treaties people in Europe had could be what made the formal cause. Like that's more distant, more abstract, a pattern that happened. That it wasn't just an assassination. That was like a symptom of the wider problem. And because the final cause is like what was and was achieved by all these countries joining in the war. What were they after? Things
So there are
like
levels.
that.
There are levels of abstraction in answering these
Yes.
questions. And then,
Yes.
so what about something like out of what was it made? How would you apply that to an event?
Not entirely sure.
Okay.
It might just be it's hard to make a clear line. In general, we have these categories,
Okay.
and you could analyze many types of things at multiple levels. And that's really the point here. It's not just one thing. We don't reduce it all to just say with a thinking. It's not that thinking is just neurons firing. There's more to it than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you need a lot of examples to then see this. This is the pattern in the abstract, but then you need to look yourself and see that things follow that pattern.
I think you adapt it for your needs, but it's a useful guide to help you not stagnate your thinking on just one type of cause. Like it forces you to think wider.
Okay. Let's go to this.
Sure.
We've got our little 4 causes here. So I was reading this about, okay, this was actually the title was that countries tend to, when anything goes wrong economically, they'll first blame speculators, then they'll blame bankers, then foreigners because they can't vote, and then they institute, quotation make, temporary controls, which don't actually end up being temporary. I think COVID's a good example of that now.
Yeah.
So, okay, so he gives the example, and it has a balance of trade deficit, for instance, and when its debts are mounting, and when the currency is declining in value, they've found a way of making things. This will have his voice. So this is just an investor. He's got a funny voice. Have found a way of making things worse with the imposition of currency controls. Is caused by these evil speculators driving down the value of our currency. There is nothing wrong with our currency. We're a strong country with a sound economy. And if we're not the speculators, everything would be okay. And then they go to, after them comes the bankers and the foreigners. Nobody likes bankers anyway. And then foreigners are equally safe because they can't vote, and their food smells bad. And then he says everyone always attacks foreigners for that reason. He's seen that. I think he's like in his 80s or something, so he's seen a lot. And then they say, this is the patterns that he's seen. Then they say, we're going to put in these temporary measures to stem the scourge of declining currency. Actually, this is from Atlas Shrugged too, right? They're always temporary measures. Temporary. Then they put in exchange controls, and they're always temporary, yet they always go on for years and years. And then he says, like anything else spawned by the government, once they're in place, a bureaucracy grows up around them. I guess this is an explanation of why it's not temporary. A constituency now arises whose sole purpose is to defend these currency controls. What is it like? Why does it happen in this pattern? What is the cause of this kind of, like, when you're looking at something like this and you keep seeing this play out, and it's like people have amnesia, like it just plays out the same way over and over again. Like, what is the cause of this pattern of, like, okay, blame speculators, bankers, foreigners, then put in temporary controls, which are never temporary?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I was just thinking about, like, how do you even work? Like, why does it happen this way?
Why is it this way?
Like, why do people always blame someone else? There's this pattern of blame speculators, bankers, foreigners, and then put in temporary controls, which are never temporary.
that's difficult because I mean that's just like the ultimate answer, like to the ultimate explanation. Why do
Right.
people always do this? But I think it's important that
Like Hitler blamed the Jews, right? So that's blaming, like
yeah,
why is that the logical direction things always end up when something is not working? It's just confusing. Why does it always end up that way?
simplification. It's easier to handle in your mind. I think
Okay.
is one reason
Right.
that if you can consolidate something in one explanation, that's a good thing. It's like the crow gone wrong. You generalize too much.
Right.
You've tried to find an essential that's not essential. It's
Right.
trying to find something to explain everything that can't be used to explain those things. There isn't always a one singular cause. And people often like to find the one cause under everything. That's almost platonic in itself. Trying to
Right.
find the one cause to everything, the ultimate
Well,
point of everything.
wouldn't philosophy tell you there is one cause though? There's if you go in layers of abstraction, there is ultimately one cause.
In some sense, yes. You could say reality is the cause. And I mean, that's not like the same as saying that the cause is God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like reality is you could think of it as like a collection of things that occur as, you can think of it as a unity eventually. There's a unity of reality, but it's not like this one factor that everything reduces to. It's more like a reduction sort of thing that someone reduced it to just one idea that explains everything. Like the physicists might say that the equation of everything, the theory of everything, which doesn't quite make sense. You can't reduce everything to just a single fact other than just to say existence exists.
Could I say that in a sense there is one, let's say, okay, so obviously reality is the one cause of everything if you want to go the most abstract.
Yes.
But then I haven't read Ominous Parallels or I'm starting to read a bit more on just history in general, but could you say that, so I don't know, I'm purely speculating here because I don't have enough knowledge to make these kind of claims, but let's say I'm making the claim that philosophy is the ultimate cause of everything. Could you say that there's a sense in which it is, which is that, for example, if an empire grows, the natural result of a growing empire is to then start taking over the world and imposing its values on other countries and overspending, but that's within the context of a certain philosophical context that'll always happen. So there's a sense in which it's political, like you have to have certain political events for it to happen. But if you want to look for the ultimate cause, it's going to be philosophy in the sense that you might need a certain philosophical context for things to play out that way. You also need, it's not, what do you say? It's maybe it's necessary and sufficient, but it's not going to tell you how it's going to play out politically. Like there'll still be different political causes that it will be needed. Is that, do you think that interpretation makes sense?
That's a fair interpretation.
Okay.
In a way that maybe there's not, depends on your level of abstraction.
Right.
If we're thinking about, this particular example in a specific country, you might say that there is no super cause, like God determining what everything must be. It's just like this level of abstraction. Well, it's just maybe some people doing what they do, but can we generalize it something that applies to multiple instances? That we can say there's a one cause, as in there's a philosophy behind things, but at that level of abstraction, it's not saying necessarily precisely which philosophy is the cause. It's not always like the one philosophy is the cause. We can generalize to say philosophy motivates people to act, but there's more specific conditions that make it play out a specific way. That is there one cause to um, World War One planning out. Well, we
Right.
don't just say it was just Archduke Ferdinand being shot. Like
Right.
that is a reason for it. But at
Right.
that level of abstraction, we can't say like the one cause was like a cabal in America trying to start a war and that they want to be part of the world stage or something insane like that. It's not that concentrated usually. It is just one single uber cause, if that makes sense. I mean, at that level of abstraction, it depends.
Yeah.
You can't just abstract anywhere you want as you wish. You got to be aware of what you're thinking of at a particular time.
You might be able to say, for example, so if you say like the ultimate cause is philosophy and you say it's necessary and sufficient, you still don't know if it's gonna, if a war, like you might say, okay, a war will happen, but you don't know if it'll happen because some guy is assassinated or a soccer game doesn't go well, or you don't know, but you know, that's sort of what I don't know though. I don't know how to get to that point where you could say that. So, but anyways, because you've got to be able to keep asking why, surely, like when you see something play out over and over again in the same way, like it makes sense to ask why, but it's not easy to get an answer.
Yeah, the answers get more and more general. And it might seem like it's not like Aristotle does try to get at that. Why, how did things change? But also still be what they are.
Yeah.
If everything's changing, then how does anything stay what it is? But things do stay what they are, despite changing. So how is that? There has to be something seemingly underlying both those things, both change and staying the same. That's a tough question, but you could say there's a cause to that.
Yeah, on that level of abstraction, it's tough to not just talk crap, basically.
Yeah, that's the hardest stuff, though. That's metaphysics by Aristotle. That's the most difficult part to read.
I know why it's so easy to go wrong, because it's so abstract that how are you going to make sure you're going to stay correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, here's my take on, so I just read this thing about American debt, and I've put in my little interpretation here, but they're writing about how, I'll sum it up for you. So basically, pre-World Wars, America did actually get into a lot of debt, but the debt was, a lot of it, the debt was, investing in like manufacturing facilities and building things, building roads, transportation, that kind of thing. Whereas now the difference between then and then there were the world wars, and America actually, I think, exported a lot of material to Europe. So they ended up paying back a lot of the debt during that period. But now the situation is a lot of the debt is not put into, it wasn't put into productive investments. It was put into transfer payments like welfare and military, which don't give you a return at all. And so there's this massive debt that America has, and they're gonna have to default on it somehow, whether that's through hyperinflation or a big deflation. And so the difference between now and say pre-World Wars is, pre-World Wars, the debt was invested into productive assets, whereas now it's been invested into, you can dispute this, but this is what I read, whereas now it's been put into transfer payments to welfare and military, which doesn't pay back debt. And then on top of that, it's unlikely that they'll get an out like World Wars, which they're not involved in, which they just get a lot of payments for, or an out which might be some huge technological breakthrough. That's basically all that can happen in order for them to pay off this debt. Otherwise, it's going to be hyperinflation or a big, massive deflation at some point. We don't know. It could be 10 years from now, 20, I have no idea. But that's what he's saying, right? And I was just thinking about like, and then you hear people like investment experts like Ray Dalio, who runs a big hedge fund. He talks about the cycles, the market cycles. And I wonder, is it a case of cycles or is it a case of reality checks? Meaning it's pretty hard to think abstractly. Like we just spoke of Aristotle talking about, you just gave an example of like things changing and not changing, and thinking about that and what implications that has for just everything. And, like it's hard for me to think like abstractly and think in a grounded way that's abstract and still is connected to reality. And so I know it's hard for a lot of people. And so I wonder if is it cycles or is it reality checks in the fact that when people are in a bad situation, they tend to say the government must do something. They must do something. And someone on the other side says, but we can't, there's debt. And they're like, but they must do something. And then you can pile on more and more debt. Seemingly nothing happens. Like concretely, you cannot observe any impact, right? So you're like, see, we got into debt and it was all fine. We must do something. And then you see where I'm going with this? And then, so if you can't think along range of the impact and it's not convincing to you, then it makes sense that you sort of, everything works in terms of the cycle. It's not cycles. It's like the long range becomes the present. And when the long range becomes the present, for example, the debt is so big that there's a economic catastrophe. That's when change happens, because something has to be in front of you for you to deal with it, for most people. What do you think of my interpretation?
So when I think cycles, I just think in terms of the system, like being self-correcting, or that the more, say when the price goes higher, the fewer people buy, then the price goes down eventually.
Right.
And that could still be a cycle,
right,
regardless of reality check. But the reality check does make sense. It sounds like what people usually think of when they discuss cognitive biases in economics.
Okay.
Like being long range itself is hard to think about. So many people bias thinking about it as the present, as if it's right now and immediate. And if it's not immediate, it's hard to think about it or see the need to respond. So in that sense, your interpretation makes sense. That a lot of human behavior is they're trying to be rational, but they don't apply the method totally right, or in their effort to be rational, they ran into an impasse or a bias in their thinking. And then that causes a problem. So it's not just the economic pattern, but also the people participating in the system.
Do you think that some biases, like the present bias, I don't know if I'm thinking about the right bias, but basically a bias where you're focused on what's happening now in front of you.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a result of a certain philosophical context, or it's like hardwired into us? In the sense
context,
that okay.
I think it's something more learned about misapplying or not being focused enough. I really do think focus often explains why people act in a more biased way than other times. And that could easily explain why people fail to make the right decisions. Not that they're being irrational per se, but they aren't applying the methods correctly.
Right.
I think often that's the case. And that does explain a lot of behavior in other contexts, not just economics, politics or day-to-day interaction, or even just.
Can you think of one example, just so I have a concrete from either politics or day-to-day?
Think of an example.